my pleasure to introduce our Ezra Roundtable speaker today, Hagit Messer from Tel Aviv University. She has a long CV. I won't go through that. What I would like to highlight is her research career was primarily digital systems process, or digital signal processing for many years. Then she spent 3 years, about 15 years ago, she spent 3 years as chief scientist for the Ministry of Science for Israel. And as part of that, it sort of opened her up to look at all kinds of other research activities that were taking place. And when she came back to Tel Aviv, she had a much broader view of the world and started looking, instead of focusing on building technology, her research has taken her to say, oh, there's already technology out there. Let's take advantage of what's out there. And I think you're going to see some very creative ways in which that thought process is taken. So please, your floor.
Thank you.
We do have the sign-up sheet, which I'll pass around.
I will start by the regular introduction of thanking for inviting me, but this time I really mean it. So I want to thank Oliver, he's not here, and Peter and Danny and Jennifer for arranging everything so efficiently. So it's a great pleasure, and Cornell is beautiful, especially now, so thank you for being here. I will talk, as the title say, about commercial wireless communication microwave links as an opportunistic sensor network. And the title was for environmental monitoring. Now I added weather monitoring to be more specific. But I will try to convince you that the right approach for environmental or weather monitoring is not to build special purpose sensors, but to use opportunistic sensor networks. And I will demonstrate how it works on specific. You can look at it as an example. It's okay. Thank you. It works. You may ask, or you may not need to ask, why do we need rainfall monitoring? The answer is obvious. We need forecast, we need for agriculture, flood prediction, etc. But most important, so you can make sure that in your next event you arrange it for the right weather. But how it is done today? How do you monitor, for example, the rainfall? There are 3 main technologies. There are 3 only technologies. One, which are rain gauges. This goes forever. I think that rain monitoring is around for more than 5,000 years. Rain gauges are a basic tool for measuring rain. I remember as elementary school, we used to have cups outside in the night and come in the morning and calculate how much we had. It's there. It's very accurate. It's very local. Then we all know the weather radar. We see it every day on TV. Very common. It's all over, but it has some deficiencies, as I will explain shortly. And then we have satellites, where we get a global view of clouds and other weather conditions. And the question is why another way of measuring rainfall is needed. And look at this cartoon. You see this poor farmer? On the average, there is a lot of rain, but not on his field, right? So there are 3 main difficulties with rainfall monitoring and measurements. And I put it there so you can see, and we will talk more about it later. The first problem is coverage. The technology which we presented before, either gauges, radar, or satellite, don't give the full coverage of the globe because of either problems with clutter, as in radar, with being very local as gauges, and satellites also, they have their deficiencies with respect to visibility, etc. Then there is the problem of tempospatial resolution. Can you really get to measure rain everywhere, anytime? And there are limitations. And there is a big problem of accuracy. Actually, if you correlate what you measure locally in a rain gauge and what you get from radar measurements, the correlation is about 50%. So it's not very accurate. And for some purposes, you need better accuracy. So what was our idea? About 10 years ago, I came up with the idea, as Peter mentioned, to do some reverse engineering on this very well-known plot. This I took from the ITU. ITU is the National Telecommunication Union, which puts the standards on communication. And when communication engineers design networks, they take into consideration that if they are going to design network in specific frequency, then the signals, the radio signals, will be attenuated by when, according to this experimental plot. So you know that if you are going to have a signal at, 19 gigahertz, and there will be a local rain of 25 millimeter per hour, then you will have attenuation of about 10 dB. Okay? So this was as in a handbook for communication engineers, and communication engineers, they know about it. Our idea was to go the other way around. In cellular communication, you have records of attenuation of the received signal level, okay? And you know the transmitted frequency. So then you can go the other way around, and given the frequency and the attenuation, you can tell how much rain is there. And taking into consideration how widely used is cellular communication, what we get is high resolution, low cost, actually zero cost, environmental monitoring system based on existing measurements from existing technology. An idea. Just to give you a short overview of cellular communication, you probably know all about it, but to make sure we are on a common background, cellular communication is called so because it's made out of cells, and each of these cells consists of all the handset users. This is an old smartphone, not so smart, but still it was very efficient, if you can remember. And there are base stations in each of these cells, and the local handset communicates with the base station, but then the base station need to communicate between each other, okay? So this communication, which is sometimes referred to as the backhaul of the cellular network, is usually done by microwave links at microwave frequencies. In some of the cases, it goes underground in fiber optics, okay? And we'll talk about it later. But the opportunity, once we had this idea that I explained before, the opportunity was that the cellular system already use microwave frequencies which are sensitive to rain. If we would have relied on the handset, the communication between the handset and the tower is done in about 2 gigahertz, which is not so sensitive to rain. So this is not what we are going to use. We are going to use the communication between the tower, which is done by these antennas that we see here. So the opportunity is there, the measurements are there, and we can do a lot with it. Actually, when we had this idea, we checked some measurements, and we saw that it works. So we published a feasibility study in Science magazine almost 10 years ago. And here you see the co-authors. This is me. This is my co-PI. I will tell you a little bit about him, Pinchas. And this is our PhD student who proved that it is doable. And since then, and that's what I'm going to tell you, what we did in the last 10 years, with this technology. We published a lot of papers. I'm not going to go through them, but the list is here. If you are interested, you can get it. I will leave you the presentation. This is a review paper which was published last May in Signal Processing magazine, so you can go through the details. And what I'm going to tell you today is the result of a work of a research group. The research group is headed by Pinchas Alpert and by me, and we have students from engineering, from electrical engineering, as well as from atmospheric sciences, where Pinchas comes from. He's a meteorologist. One of our members is now with you. Noam is here. And the group is there, and we have usually like 10 students. We meet every week. And this group is quite unique because we have a synergy between the application person and the methodology person. And that's why we get so many papers. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sensor, the environmental sensor, which, as I explained, is an opportunistic sensor. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the sensors network, because we have a network of such sensors. The needs, how it cope with the needs that I mentioned before, why the existing systems are not good enough. What can it sense, these sensors? And I will show you some signal processing challenges and results. I know that I have another half an hour, so let's go through it. So the sensor, I want to emphasize again that what I consider as a sensor is the electromagnetic wave which propagates between two cellular antennas. This is a typical antenna. At least in Israel it looks like this. In other places it is more organized, you know, and you see it out. And you have on this tower two kinds of antennas. These antennas, the rectangular antennas, are communicated between the base station and the headset. We call it uplink or downlink, depending on the direction of the communication. But in some towers, you can also see these round antennas. These are the microwave antennas which communicate between two towers, like here. And usually between each two towers, we call it a microwave link. We have at least two such links. One transferring the signal from here to here, and the other one the other direction. In many cases, you have other two for redundancy. And they are in different frequencies and sometimes in different polarization. So from our point of view, this is one sensor, but actually between any two antennas, we have at least 2 or 3 or even 4 sensors, and diversity is very good for sensing. In cellular backhaul network, currently most frequencies are in the K-band, between 6 to 40 gigahertz. In the future, most of the frequencies will be in higher frequencies, which also give us some opportunities. Before I showed you this plot that relates attenuation with frequencies, and then we had these lines which were related to rainfall. But you can see here, for example, we have the green lines. These are due to fog, okay? And then we have this line which is due to humidity, water vapor in the atmosphere, and oxygen. So you have many things that influence the attenuation of the microwave signal. As I said, this is from Ericsson. The Ericsson puts here under different colors the frequencies which are used by microwave transmission. The traditional bands are the blue bands, which are up to 40 gigahertz. The new bands are the green, especially here. These are interesting frequencies for our purpose. And then future bands can even go to higher frequencies. And higher frequencies are more sensitive to environmental phenomena, not only weather, but also potentially pollution and smaller particles. Because we need to propose many PhD dissertations to our students, the signals are not trivial, they are complicated. And these are examples of signals that we get from cellular providers. These are actual signals. Here is the time domain, and here is the attenuation of the signal on this axis. And what you see here are two different protocols. This protocol was used by an Israeli cellular provider, which is called Pelephone. And they used to sample the received signal level between these two antennas every minute. But they logged it, they stored it with a quantization of 1 dB. So what we see here,
Repeat that last statement.
1 dB quantization.
Okay.
Okay, the sensitivity was limited to 1 dB. They are not interested in the sensitivity, they are interested in having the communication. And you can see it here. These are 8 different panels due to 8 different links, a different length. So if the link is long like this one, this is a very long link, so the attenuation due to rain is dramatic. It's almost 40 dB. But if like here you have a short link, then the total attenuation is only 3 dB due to the same rain, because all this happened at the same time. Okay? And the two colors represent the two directions, different frequencies within the same link. And you can see here the problems that we have with this data. We have quantization noise, we have variable dynamic range. Since we are interested in attenuation, sometimes it is hard to tell what exactly is the zero level from which you measure attenuation. On top of it, to make it even more challenging, the protocols that other cellular providers use, not Pelephone, but Cellcom in this example, is a different protocol. Instead of sampling the signal every minute, they store the signal every 15 minutes, and every 15 minutes they store only two numbers, the minimal and the maximal value of the received signal level during the last 15 minutes. So what we then get are two time sequence, one of the minima and one of the maxima, and we have tough nonlinear pre-processing before we get the samples. So I must say that we have colleagues in the Netherlands, in Holland, and they had a similar idea of using microwave link for monitoring rain. And they went to buy, with their research money, transmitter and receiver in the microwave frequencies, and the producer of the microwave equipment told them, why buying? Go to the cellular providers, they use it anyway. So they went to the cellular providers and they look at these signals and they say, oh, come on, we cannot get anything out of these lousy signals. So they gave away the idea. They bought the machine, they installed it, they got very accurate results, but only one link. It couldn't be scalable. But we are not afraid of these ugly signals because we are signal processing experts, okay? And that's why we got the science paper. They almost killed themselves after they saw our paper. But that's life in science, right? You know about it. Okay, so we have the sensors. We have challenges with the signal, but we have the potential of measuring all these effects, rain, fog, humidity, etc., etc. But as I said, it's not only one sensor. With one sensor, we couldn't do much, but we have a network of such sensors. And we have plenty of them. And the amount of the data is really the big opportunity. Okay? In most countries, commercial microwave network, we like to use the initial CMN, commercial microwave networks, are used for cellular backhaul. But I said in most countries on how much it is used, look at this plot. This again was given to us by Ericsson. And these are, I'm not sure if you can read it, these are different places in the world. This is, for example, North America, where we are now. This is Latin America. This is, for example, Middle East, and this is India, etc., etc. This one is China, okay? And this is the percentage of use of microwave backhaul, which can be as low as 5%, as high as 90% in some areas. backhaul is the network which connects all the towers, all the base station in the cellular system. Okay? As I said at the beginning, it can be done by microwave communication, but it can also go underground in fiber optics and other line communication. So if the percentage is low here, it means that it actually go in actual lines, not wireless communication. So as you can see, it varies. It's different in different countries. You can see the trend because there are 2 years here, 2014 and 2019, which is a prediction of what is going to be there in 5 years. And in some cases, it goes up or down. So you see the trend. Generally speaking, the links are spatially distributed and the network operates continuously, which gives us a great opportunity. And all this network consists of links at different frequency, different lengths, different heights, and arbitrary geometry, which gives us the diversity. You may say, okay, so your technology is not applicable everywhere, because in China, for example, the rate is very low. But still, you don't need to look at the percentage. You need to look at the absolute numbers, which can still be considerable. Okay?
But if you look at the trend,
yes?
they're almost all going down.
I will get to it in 1 minute. Actually, I'm not sure if the blue one is 2010 or 2019. So I'm not sure. It can go the other way around, but I will talk about the trend. Okay, so what I'm saying is that we have a sensor which didn't mean to be a sensor for environmental monitoring. That's why I call it opportunistic sensor. And we have a network of such sensors almost everywhere, okay? And now I want to convince you that what we actually have is what is referred to in the signal processing community as wireless sensor network. Wireless sensor network, there are a lot of theories about wireless sensor networks, and they are characterized by specifically 3 main features. Wireless sensor network, usually it's a network of specifically designed sensors, which should be low-cost sensors. They are spatially distributed, and they should be autonomous. And if we look at what we have out of our opportunistic sensor, of course, our sensors are very low-cost. They cost nothing. They are already there. They are spatially distributed, and they are autonomous. So what I'm saying that what we have in hand is an opportunistic sensor network for environmental monitoring, for rainfall monitoring. Our opportunity, especially in signal processing, is the amount of data which is used and the diversity of measurements, which is very important to be able to distinguish between different phenomena, etc. But we also have a challenge. The challenge is the availability of measurement at sufficient tempospatial resolution, meaning if the cellular provider indeed are willing to share these measurements, and if they use it in the tempospatial resolution which is appropriate for our purposes. Just to give you an idea about the availability of measurements, this is the case of Israel. In Israel, there are 3 major cellular providers, Cellcom, Orange, and Pelephone, and our group gets measurements from all of them. And these are the links which are available for us in Israel. I didn't put the borders of the state of Israel because of political reasons, but as you can see here, the links actually somehow plot the borders. And in some areas, like in Tel Aviv area in Jerusalem, it is very dense. In other area here, like in the south of Israel, which is kind of a desert, it is less dense, but it covers very nicely the state of Israel. Here is the Palestinians authority, and actually we are trying to get measurements from them because environment doesn't know any borders. But just to give you a reference, this is Holland, this is the Netherlands. And they can plot borders, no political problems there. And you can see a very good coverage of links in Holland. I took it out of a recent paper, but our Dutch colleagues. I think this is only for one provider. If they put on links from other providers, they had even a denser coverage, okay? And at least what you can see here, not all of them are connected because some of the connections can go underground, okay? In Israel, it is more interconnected. So there are good coverage, even if it is not 100%, even if it is only 50% of the links, then you have a nice coverage of almost all areas. This is a review paper which was published in the proceedings of the IEEE about 5 years ago, which actually review environmental wireless sensor network. And it reviewed, I think, 10 or 12 special purpose environmental sensor network, which were built in different places around the world. And the bottom line was not so optimistic. They said that we had high expectation about environmental monitoring with sensor networks, and it doesn't meet the expectation. Why? Here are 5 main reasons. Installation cost, energy source, the need for communication and data processing, the need for maintenance and reliability. So even if you put a lot of money, you put the sensor, after a few years you need to get back to it, it doesn't work. What I'm saying is that our technique doesn't suffer from all these deficiencies. We have no installation cost, we don't need to care about energy source, communication processing, maintenance, reliability. It is all done by the cellular provider for their own needs. So we don't need to care about it. So this is the bottom line. My main statement in the first part of my presentation is that opportunistic sensor networks, and in particular the commercial microwave network as an opportunistic sensor network, is, from my point of view, the future of environmental monitoring. Don't bother about building more radars and others, because we have enough existing technology which can be used for environmental monitoring. And I will show you what we can do with it. I also put the new buzzword, IoT, Internet of Things, because you can relate it if you want to the new buzzword, and if you use the right buzzword, you get financial support, right? So you can. About your question about the future, the trends, again, this is from Ericsson, and they try to learn the market. Here, indeed, this is 2019, and they anticipate that if you look at the steady state, you will have 50% microwave, and it will converge to 50% fiber optics, and the copper disappears, okay? But interestingly enough, 2 weeks ago, there was a interesting paper in the IEEE communication technology, and they are learning now the 5th generation. And they were saying in this paper that for the 5th generation, because of the technology of the 5th generation cellular communication system, they will need to have wireless backhaul or even fronthaul for many of the sites. So it is not going to disappear. So you can go to this direction. Okay. Let's look a little bit about what was wrong about the existing technology for measuring rainfall. And I said that the first problem was the coverage. Look at this amazing plot showing the weather radar coverage around the globe. Okay? You see North America is very well lit by a good coverage of weather radar. But look at South America. It is almost dark. Look at Europe, which is nice, Australia, but look at Africa. There is no coverage, not at all. Coverage of weather radar in Africa. So especially in developing countries, we don't know what's going on there in terms of weather. And even from the scientific point of view, if you really want to know what's going on around the globe, you need to have measurements everywhere. But if you look at Africa, for example, the cellular use is growing dramatically, so they do have good coverage of cellular. Luckily, and this was a paper from our Dutch colleagues again, they have shown that you can have rainfall mapping, similar to radar, only from the microwave links. Okay? So we can, and that's what we are saying, we can cover Africa, South America, etc. by a radar-like mapping without employing any radar machine. You can just use the cellular and have this wonderful observation of rainfall out of existing technology, so you can get a better coverage. Yes, please.
Were those plots on the left was radar only?
No, I think these were...
On the right is the radar.
Okay, I will show you some other examples if I can go there. This is not our paper. These are radar and rain gauges, and these are links, yes. These are links, and these are radar, and when you compare them, you see a similarity. Actually, we claim that these are more accurate because they are closer to the ground, okay? So the idea of using our technology in Africa was took over by a colleague, a French colleague, Grossette Moriel. She's from Toulouse. I mentioned her name yesterday. And she arranged a workshop in Africa, which happened a few months ago, with 18 countries, 87 participants, and local trainees to learn about our technology so they can apply it in Africa. This is a very nice initiative. The other problem that I mentioned before was we need better tempo spatial resolution. What I'm going to show you here is a plot from one of our papers from 2009, where you will see on the right, this is a radar map, and we took this small area, and we used links which were on this area to plot the high resolution changes of rainfall in this area in a temporal resolution of 1 minute and spatial resolution of 1 square kilometers. And I will show you a short movie, but you will be able to see that for very short time, like 1 or 2 minutes, you may have a very strong rain in a local as 1 square kilometer. Okay. I think this works. Okay. I think this idea of having rain locally for small area, very short time, was theoretically known, but it could never be demonstrated using existing technology. And when we first showed this movie to meteorologists, they were excited, like they were first saw. I said this is the electronic microscope of weather, because they could see things in resolution that they couldn't see before. That was the time that we have measurement every minute, and we could create these high-resolution plots. Very impressive. And the third need that I mentioned in the beginning was the accuracy. And again, I told you that accuracy of radar is considered to be not so great, but here is a recent paper, Chinese paper, which claims that the accuracy that we can get by correlating measurements induced by the microwave links and by rain gauges, which is considered as the ground truth, we get a correlation of more than 0.9. And if you look at the accumulated rain, the error is less than 0.5 millimeters, which is a great accuracy. Yes, please.
On this question of resolution, the scale that you were talking about in the previous slide, how does that compare to the distances between towers? And does attenuation get affected when it's raining in one part of the link and it's not raining in the other?
Of course, your ability to be accurate and to give high resolution depends on the density of the links. And
I'm talking about for an individual link.
It doesn't. Individual links.
That not
yes, but we never use only one for mapping.
Uh-huh. Okay.
The idea is to have a network, and then you can have the crosses and the multiplicativity to get a high resolution.
A systems approach.
System approach, absolutely. Okay, so rain mapping is important, and your question was right in the right point. And most of the people that followed our idea was busy producing these radar-like maps of of rain. And this is the first equation I put on board. You see? We are almost more than half time away. But this is a simplified equation that relates attenuation and rainfall. A is the attenuation, R is the rain rate, and there are two constants, A and B, which gives it a power law, and L is the length of the link, okay? So A and B are a constant which depends on frequency, rain temperature, drop side distribution, etc. And they are given in the literature. You can open a book and get this A and B for different areas. A is measured, R is what we need, and L we know because this is part of the system. So everything which was done, almost everything which was done till now, was actually to convert the attenuation into rain rate along this line, and then do some imaging tomography technique to create this map. Is it sufficient? I just put here on the board some open questions, which saying that we still have room for more PhD students and others, okay? For example, and this is relating to what you just asked, we need to set up sufficient conditions to ensure coverage, because the map of the links is given. Is it sufficient? Are we going to cover a given area like kind of a Nyquist theory? Does it links the given network really cover everything? So we are working on trying to get some theory, saying when is a given network sufficient, or sometimes you need to fill in with gauges and other side information to make sure that you don't miss anything. The accuracy that we are getting, is it good enough? Can we improve it? There are many open questions regarding the accuracy. And when you are talking about accuracy, there is a big difference between the accumulated accuracy of the measurement of the accumulated rain, or if you look at the instantaneous, where we have no reference for instantaneous rain rate. And then we have to take into consideration the limitation of the signal, like the nonlinear pre-processing that need us to do more sophisticated signal processing, the quantization problem, etc. What I call multimodality, another buzzword, but I like it, is the fusion of different sources of measurement. If you look only with what we get from the microwave links, this is partial. But in many cases, you have also radar, you have also gauges, you have also satellite. And the idea how to fuse all measurements together, this is the right approach. And how to do it is an open question. There are many ways to cope with this. Then there are other problems like variability of rain rate with height, challenging areas like in slopes and urban areas, etc., etc. So there are open questions to other groups, not only in our group. Okay, so let me spend maybe 10 minutes on some recent result on environmental monitoring from our group. As I said, all the details are in the papers that I show in the beginning, but I just want to give you a feeling that what can be done. First of all, when we look on rain mapping, which is the major application of interest for most people, then the procedure is as follows. You start with the received signal level data, which is supplied by the cellular provider. They have it. And I must emphasize that getting this measurement is not a big deal because there is no problem of privacy. It's a physical signal. We get the received signal level, no problem. So that's what we get from the cellular providers, and in Israel we have it from all of them. Then you need to do some pre-processing to these signals, and then you convert it from attenuation to rain. This is the first stage. What you have at that time, you have a map of links with the average rain rate over each of the links. Then what you can do is a two-dimensional mapping, what we call instantaneous reconstruction of the rain. From these two-dimensional samples along this microwave link, you can reconstruct the rain. But if you do it instantaneously, you lose the prior knowledge about the dynamic of rain. So the next step is to go to dynamic reconstruction, because actually the instantaneous map at this minute is related to the one. So we do kind of Kalman filtering, etc., and we go to dynamic reconstruction, which is more accurate, and then you can do integration with radar, etc., and then you get a better and better rain field, even in cases that you don't have such a good coverage, because you can extrapolate in time. So this is a major way to get better rainfall mapping. We have only one paper published lately about integration of results from links, radar, and rain gauges. The paper was published, I think this was the discussion version, and one of the co-authors, our colleague Rana Samuels, she passed away, so I put her photo here. We remember her and we appreciate everything that she did with us. So this is just a very preliminary paper on this direction of multimodality. Now, to make it more interesting, we also can deal with other than rain phenomena. And actually, Noam here, his dissertation, his PhD was mostly on non-rain phenomena. Our signal processing challenge comes from the fact that attenuation is caused by many different environmental factors, not only rain. Okay? Luckily, the rain is dominant, but the others are there. As I said, the opportunities, the diversity of measurements, and we have some interesting results. Let's look again in another equation, not too many I said, but let's consider the attenuation between the receiver and transmitter on these two antennas. So the total attenuation here consists of several parts. One part is the path loss, because the signal needs to travel from one point to the other. Okay? The other part is because of potentially precipitation. You may have or you may have not, but if you have precipitation, then it contributes to the attenuation. Then we always have contribution due to humidity, to the water vapor in the air, which influence the propagation channel. This is an interesting phenomenon. Not many people know about it. There is the phenomenon of wet antennas. The antennas get wet because of humidity, because of rain, then it contributes to attenuation in the link. And we always have noise. Here we put together the additive noise and the quantization noise, which is not additive, but let's do it for the sake of simplicity. So our challenge is the detection, to detect if there is or not precipitation at a given period, the classification, what kind of precipitation, the estimation, what amount of rainfall, source separation, if we can separate these sources. These are all signal processing challenges. How do we do it? As I say, luckily we have diversity and we have different features to different physical phenomena. Like precipitation is more local in time and space, while fog, for example, is less local. So if you have different spread, then you can take advantage on the diversity of the measurements. Okay? So if it would have been just additive, or if we would have had only one link, we could do nothing. But because we have all this opportunity, we actually came up with what I call tree-type classification algorithms. And what we have here is the result of many work of many students. We start with receiving the received signal level measurements. And then we do first statistical test, which is called MFLRT, multifamily likelihood ratio test. And then we can distinguish between precipitation and other atmospheric phenomena. This is the first step, okay? And it is described on this paper. If we identify precipitation, then we go to a different class of algorithms, either pattern recognition algorithms, which can classify which kind of precipitation it was, rain, sleet, or snow. If it is rain, then you can go into mapping, etc. And we also have an interesting paper in which we actually automatically and blindly calculated the accumulated rainfall due to, which is blind to the fact if it is rain or snow. Still it put it all together and we know how much fall we had blindly out of the diversity of the measurement. If, on the other hand, we decide that there is no precipitation, then we go to another statistical test, the GLRT, the Generalized Likelihood Ratio test, and here we can distinguish between water vapor and moist antenna or fog, or wet antenna or fog, and in a recent paper we also distinguish between these two. So we know how to get along all the way. Please know that our algorithm assumes no side information. It may be the case in Africa that you have no side information. In many other cases, you do have side information because you have satellite or radar and so on. Then you can do much better. But even if we have no side information, because of the diversity within our measurements, we can do a lot in terms of signal processing. Let me go fast through fog detection. Actually, Noam could do it because it is mostly his work. But it's very interesting because, surprisingly, there are some machines that can measure fog. But the dominant equipment to measure fog is this one. Okay? You have especially in airport, you have some special purpose machine. It's important. The satellite may identify fog if it is not cloudy, but if the fog is below the clouds, you don't see it, okay? But what we are saying that with our technique, with the microwave link, you can automatically identify fog. And we have published 2 papers about it. The first one focused on dense fog. Why? Because as this plot shows you the relation between frequency and attenuation due to fog. But you remember we have quantization limits, and since fog influences attenuation very delicately, in many cases it's below the quantization level. So with the current frequency, which are here in yellow, you could only identify dense fog. You couldn't identify or measure mild fog. But with the future frequency band, which is in this paper, you will be able also to measure a mild fog, which is a big opportunity. Fog is not the same simple power law that I showed you before for rain. Here you have a different equation, which actually relates the LWC, the liquid water contains in the fog, to the attenuation with some specific factor here. And these are very recent results where we show that we can map fog in Israel. These are links which identify fog in a given time. Here, the links here around Jerusalem, here they didn't identify any fog. But all the others, the one with the red dots, they identify fog. And again, we have a problem, what is the ground truth? In this dense fog event, we were lucky to have satellite images with no clouds around our area. So actually we are looking at this area and we see that the fog here is along the seashore, right, like this one here. And just to convince you that this is not only one time example, here is another example from another period. And again, since we are scientists and we need to be very accurate, we took a dry night, and in this dry night, none of the links, almost none, I think one here, identify fog. So our technique can map and identify fog, which is nice. We also did a simulation showing the potential of higher frequency bands. Actually, what we took here are actual links in Israel, these black dots along the shore of Israel, and we simulated 3 different cases. Suppose all these links were in the frequency about 20 gigahertz, 38 gigahertz, or 80 gigahertz. What coverage, what is the minimal level of fog which is required to be identified by these links? So in this case, 20 gigahertz, you see that you need to have very dense fog, meaning high liquid water content. within the fog. Okay, these are the values that you need in order to be able to identify them with this network. But if you go to higher frequencies, especially in the future, when we will be around 80 gigahertz, then even a very mild fog, which limits the visibility to 1 kilometer, can be identified by our system. And luckily, I can prove that this was right, not only simulation. Here are very recent results from an experimental link which was put by Ericsson in Sweden and in 76 gigahertz. These are the new future bands. And they had this link running for 5 years. And they sent us the measurements, and we analyzed the measurements, and we show how fog events can be easily identified by the 80 gigahertz link, even when the fog is mild. Okay, the visibility range here is 1 kilometer. So really, there is a future for automatic fog detection with existing technology, which is great. And this is another recent paper. I am running out of time, so I'll rush, that distinguish DO and fog. And this is a ROC, receiver operating characteristic, which relates the false alarm and the detection probability of dewy nights with respect to humid but non-dewy nights, and it shows reasonable results, which is promising. It's a new direction. And my almost last slides is talking a little bit about what I call direct signal processing challenges. As I said, we are planning between meteorological application and signal processing challenges. This is the game. So we need to know how do you get the best signal processing for the extreme measurement, because actually now most of the measurements are minimal and maximal signal, which is a different topic. We need to know how to deal with quantization. That future technologies of the backhauling is going to be done in MIMO, multi-input, multi-output, several antennas. And also there is a problem of modulation. Sometimes when they send this signal from one tower to the other, sometimes they change modulation during transmission. How it affects the received signal level, we need to deal with it. And then at the end of the day, right now we use only the received signal level, the amplitude of the signal. But we also have polarization, we also have phase and delay, so there may be other measurements that can be used to detect more features in this sensor. This slide shows you how we deal with the fact that instead of having the actual data, we have only the minimal and maximal measurements. And what we do is this is like a EM algorithm, but to retrieve the complete data. But actually what we do now, we do the transformation and we get the parameter estimation in a systematic way, but this is more signal processing. My last and most important slide is acknowledgement, because as I said, this was just an idea. But if we wouldn't get real measurements from cellular providers, we couldn't go anywhere. And the cellular providers in Israel, they all give us measurements pro bono, all 3 cellular providers. And we based our research on real data, real measurement, and we really appreciate it. It's not trivial. And it's not happening everywhere. And I also added Ericsson in Sweden, because now Ericsson also give us measurements because they are also interested in it. I think that's it, and I'm almost on time. Thank you. Peter, you're first.
So if I were a systems engineering student, I would walk away with a nice example of, we usually talk about unintended consequences of systems, and what you're focusing our attention on is opportunistic, or unintended opportunities, might be another phrase, that there are systems out there that are creating potential benefits that weren't in the original design. So that's exciting.
Okay.
Now, extending it one more piece, it's since there's no benefit of the data to the company, they get neither cost nor benefit to the data. Talk about what incentives there could be for them to share the data, or how you would get companies to share their data.
This is a very good point, and lately I'm a little bit worried about it, because our experience in Israel was very good. As I said, we came to the cellular providers, we put our idea, and we said, can you share your measurements with us? And they were all willing to give it to us, because for them, there's no risk in sharing this data. And as I said, they did it all pro bono, and we didn't sign any contracts or agreement, they just give it to us. Our students are in direct relationship between them, and we get the data. But the experience of our colleagues, and this is one of the reasons why it took 9 years since our first paper was published till other groups got into it, they have difficulties in getting the measurements from the cellular providers, not because there is a real problem, but the cellular providers say it's not our business, we are not interested in dealing with it, and there may be potential risk that we didn't think about it, I don't know. I know that somebody lately told me that they offer money to the cellular providers, and they didn't even do it for money. The way I see it, in your system approach, it may be a case where the government who give the license to the cellular provider should force them to share measurements that they don't need and can contribute to the public good. Because these measurements are there anyway. So we prove that technically the measurements can be used even if they don't need to do anything. You know, I have a big fight in my students because our cellular providers were so nice. In many cases, they say, if you want a special thing, just ask for it. I said, don't ask for them for anything. It is our challenge to use what they are doing anyway. This is the philosophical approach. They don't need to do anything specially for you. They do what they are doing. They spare it because they don't need it, and then you can get things out of it. But this is a big challenge. I don't know what to do. Technically, it is feasible. Now the rest is political or system.
You pointed out that the frequencies of the handsets, the lower frequencies, have less sensitivity to the precipitation rates. So I'm curious, though, because you have orders of magnitude greater spatial density of handsets, and if you had apps that could send those data up, is there enough signal there that you could get something?
It's a good question because...
Could you repeat the question for off-campus?
Okay. Actually, the bottom line was, can we also use the same approach with the handset, not with the backhaul? And the handset will always be wireless, so you don't have to worry about moving to fiber, etc. So we have it on the back of our mind for many years. We tried it 8 years ago. It was Yoni. At that time, it was already the third generation, or even 2.5 generation. And at that time, we looked at the probability density function, actually, of accumulated power of many such handsets, because you cannot look at the individual one. And we try to see changes. For example, if you look at the same time in the same area, in a rainy day and a non-rainy day, do you see a different distribution? And sure, there were differences. You know why? Because the people go into. So it's more complicated. It's not only the signal itself. I believe that the answer to your question is positive. But we are not there yet. It calls for big data, for other challenges. But as you said, there is so much data there. Something can be extracted from there. And I'm talking about automatic extraction, not that you ask people to do something with their machine. And I believe it will be possible, maybe in the 5th generation.
So if you set up a production system based on, I assume there are no production systems that produce these conclusions today. This is all research, right? But if you set up a production system based on that, you have another issue that can arise, it seems to me, and that is change. And you've set it up so that you've started with a stable network or a specific network with specific characteristics and specific equipment. They change the equipment in some towers. That, it seems to me, would impact your the output, and you need some mechanism for reporting or detecting that change.
This is not a problem, because what we get from the cellular provider is a table with the operating links and the measurements. And the input to our algorithms are these two rows or columns in this table. So it is updated automatically, right? We had no problem with updating them. Not all the time all the links are operated, so we do it automatically. They have it as part of their measurement. So it's flexible. It is not set up to a specific structure. It can change. It can be dynamic. Yes, please.
So you're taking data from given the measurement network, but there's different densities around. So if you're given a chance, how would you reorganize the stuff so that you can do better prediction?
You see, you take the approach of my student. They want to change the world. I want to use what is there. It's a good question. As I said, this is ongoing research to see. The question is what is density is sufficient to ensure coverage. And if it is not, what do you do? That's what you are asking. And if the given density is not sufficient, then you either have to fuse with other measurements like radar and others, or to my understanding, you can plug in rain gauges in some specific location. It is much cheaper. And if you just put a rain gauge in cases to ensure coverage, I think you can do it. But this is the synthesis part. We are not there. We are looking at it. It's the problem is sparsity. It's a sparse problem, so we need to see what are the sufficient conditions. Yeah, please.
Do other things in the air, like aerosols or smog, that related thing, does that affect the attenuation of the signal? Is that another possible domain that you think of?
Again, it's a good question. Maybe Noam can elaborate. We are lucky. Israel is kind of a beta site, you know. It's a small country, and we have some very special habits. Like, for example, there is one day a year when all people have fires outside. It's a special holiday. So once we looked at the measurements on this specific day to see if we see the smoke, which is all over there, and we didn't identify. Again, it was done a few years ago, and the technology advanced, and we are going to higher frequency. I believe potentially you will be able to overcome the sensitivity problem. It does affect, of course, everything directly. But then again, there is now ongoing research that Noam is doing with Oliver, and they are looking for indirect effects on aerosol and particles, and maybe Noam can tell you about it. I think I was hinted this is the last question, right? So it's you.
Circulation curves. You have water on an oxygen curve.
Mm-hmm.
Water one I understand. The oxygen one is, the oxygen concentration is constant, and therefore I couldn't understand, was that additive to the raised effects or what?
It is additive. No, maybe you can explain.
Yeah, you mean if the oxygen is constant, how can you detect it, or?
No.
Well, I mean, the attenuation curves, maybe you look at one. Do you add the attenuation curve? In other words, the raised curve looks like that.
Yes.
So that's a bad frequency to operate at.
Yes, yes.
80, exactly 80 is a bad one to operate at because you have that attenuation plus all the other ones on top of it. Okay. So do people avoid 80 then?
Currently, we didn't work much with 80 gigahertz because it's more new bands that are starting to be used.
No, but his question is why technologically you go to these frequencies if there is a problem
Looks
there,
like you should go to
right?
85.
Yeah, but the problem is the spectrum is so dense that people are saying, okay, we have no choice but to go to these frequencies, and then we use higher power.
Yes, nobody else wants 80, so I'll take
Yeah,
it. Right?
yeah, okay. That's the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
That's for the local rain. That's fantastic.
Provide you with a Cornell umbrella.
Ah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much.